Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Agnete Sisselrød, and I am very happy to introduce our keynote speaker this afternoon, Dr. Paul Feldman. He is Chief Executive of JISC, the United Kingdom's technology body for higher education and research, and one of the key drivers for digital transformation of higher education and research in UK. Dr. Paul Feldman is a member of the Giant Board of Directors, and in 2016 was listed in the Sunday Times list of Britain's 500 most influential in the area of engineering and technology. And his talk today is about Education 4.0 and its potential. Please give Dr. Paul Feldman a warm welcome.
Good afternoon. Can we have the sound? Not that it matters. Don't worry. Oh. Good afternoon again. So that was a 2D representation of a video of a virtual reality explanation of our vision of what the future could be like for higher education. It was actually quite a fascinating thing to look through, but the most fascinating thing was it was limited by our own imaginations of what technology might look like in the future, and had probably too much feet in today. Anyway, I'm going to very quickly talk to you just to position JISC and spend most of my time talking about our vision. So, as we said, we are the UK's digital body for higher education, further education and research. These days we talk about us as being lifelong learning, and our goal is to make the UK the best place to teach, learn and research using technology. We serve the whole of the UK, every public university, all but one college in the UK, and many, many other organisations will use our services for one thing or another. This next bit is going to go very fast because you don't want to see, you only want to get a really feel of what this is. These are the four key things that we do. We are the UK's National Research and Education Network in Janet. And we connect right to the door of the campus. And some of our universities are now got 100 gigabits per second appearing in the campus, which is critical for the needs of the future. We provide a wide range of cybersecurity services. You'll recognize some of those logos. Some of you may be Open Athens users. We acquired Open Athens at the beginning of the year as a single sign-on capability, so we have both Shibboleth and single sign and Open Athens. We are the drivers of open science in the UK, with a key focus at the moment on data preservation. Very quickly, you may have seen 100 million come up there. We save the UK 100 million alone in buying digital content. We buy about 60% of the UK's digital content. Learning Analytics was the presentation I walked into before. We do the National Learning Analytics Service. Wide range of universities in the UK already using this with a range of solutions. Some of you may have seen our Building Digital Capabilities Service because we've been presenting it here. And I noticed the team have put some brochures at the top. We also develop new capabilities for the UK. And one of the ones we're talking about is our vision for Education 4.0. Most of you, I hope, if not all of you, will have come across the concept of the Industrial Revolution 4.0. This is the use of things like machine learning, big data, Internet of Things, mixed reality, high-performance networking to really change industries. It's a leap above just introducing the Internet. So far, the previous three revolutions haven't changed the way we teach. You can recognize the way we teach, even what I'm doing now, in the way it was done 500 years ago. We truly believe these technologies have the opportunity to totally transform the way that teaching happens into the future. This is the next generation of the way that we teach our students and our students learn. It has its feet in lots of the things that you'd have been talking about at this conference and in previous conferences, but the technology that we have available to us coming up in the next few years allows us to take it to the point where we can just turn things totally on its head. And we are talking about a capability for 10 to 15 years' time. Some of the capability we need isn't possible yet for higher education. We're seeing some of it appearing in schools because it's easier to teach school in a structured curriculum than it is the loose type of curriculums that we see in higher education. These are the four key areas that we think are most important in this type of transformation. So this technology can transform completely the way that we teach our students. Not least because it will totally transform the way that students learn, with a new paradigm of learning for students, where it's much more self-directed and where the technology is actually the tutor rather than a person. If we do all this and we get it right, we will no longer need exams. We can actually assess continuously in a highly rigorous way. And of course, if we do all this, we don't need rooms like this. We need totally different campuses. But again, that's been the theme of this conference. And I think you have a presentation from Northampton University tomorrow, who are probably the most advanced campus in the UK. So they've already gone some way in the direction. Though we do think that this, in the next 15 years, will require another leap in thinking in the use of campuses. So what we've tried to do is to bring this to life. What are we really talking about? Because we do believe these technologies is a different way of learning. So, for example, we've got outside a virtual reality capability. We do believe that mixed reality is the way all skills will be taught in the future. You might still need to try it in practice to get the tick in the box that you have a skill, but it is but mixed reality, particularly with the capabilities coming up, are the best way to teach an awful lot of skills and give students experience they just couldn't get in real life. On our Natalie 4.0 video, you saw a flyover of a tribal village somewhere, probably in Afghanistan. We're not going to send students to Afghanistan, but they can experience culture through virtual reality in a way that is not otherwise accessible to them. We do believe that machine learning AI type capabilities can guide a student through their learning journey. They don't need to sit in serried ranks like this to learn with a sage and the stage at the front of the theatre. They can actually access the whole world of learning in a self-directed way, in a way that's personalized to them. Everybody has a different learning preference, a different speed of learning and different capabilities. They need to work on some things much, much more than others. The technology can work at their pace, through their preferences, so that by the end of it, every student is as capable, fulfills their potential through the use of the technology guiding them. That sounds an awfully boring way of learning. It sounds almost like the Matrix getting plugged in and coming out a year later fully formed as a well-rounded person. That's not well-rounded. We do believe as well that active and project-based learning is the best way to really embed the skills and the learning that students will get in that self-directed way. The technology can give knowledge, it can't really embed it in, it can't deliver that real understanding of how it works. And we believe that active learning is the way to really embed that learning. And our campuses will be full of students working together on their subjects. And again, you'll see some of what Northampton have done in that sense tomorrow. We've said we do believe this is the future for assessment. The technology will be watching the student all the time in their self-directed learning. It'll be watching the project groups all the time in their project. And we've got multiple ways to do this. So the technology will know what they've done, how they've done, and their capabilities. Have they actually understood? Can they answer the questions? You don't then need to put them through an exam to tell you what the technology knows. It's learning analytics in the next levels. So we do believe that at some point you can lose exams and trust the technology to tell you whether the student is capable or not and how capable they are. Now, this may sound like we've just made every lecturer in the world redundant. That is not the case. We do believe that lecturers are essential to students' learning. We do believe that students need to be on campus to do this, so they really get it, as it were. But we do believe that lecturers will move away from standing up the front of a lecture theatre to be mentors. We talk about it as moving from giving knowledge, which is what I'm doing now, into giving wisdom and insight. A really interesting corollary of that is, where are these lecturers? How do you get a postdoc to be a fully formed lecturer with wisdom and insight? And that's a key question that we're going to have to answer in the decades to come. But this is where we think things will be so much more seminar-based, much more lecturers working with their students to ensure that they really do understand everything, and to pass on their years and years of depth of understanding that it's a long while before the technology will be able to do. And one other key thing that we need to remember is, while we're transforming technology, education, through all of this, every other sector is being transformed as well. So teaching doctors to be good diagnosticians is a need for today. It is not a need for tomorrow. Artificial intelligence is better at diagnosing, it will be better at diagnosing most illnesses than people. Already today, there's a lot of evidence that technology is better, more reliable in a number of diseases than people are. So we don't need to train doctors to be able to diagnose disease. We need them to help cure the disease. We need them to help work with the disease. So we need to train our doctors for that future, not diagnosis, for example. Lawyers no longer need to know the full history of law and precedent and everything else that they spend years being taught. They need to know how to understand the law, how to use the law, and how to work with machine learning to get their clients off the burglary they just did, or whatever it is that happens to be. So teaching students how to be able to read law books is a today task. It's not a tomorrow task. We need to teach students to be something very different. We need them to teach them the soft skills that they're going to need to be productive citizens tomorrow. We also need to give them the capability to reinvent themselves. In the long lives that our children are going to be experiencing in the future of work, it is unlikely they will end at the age of 75 in the profession that they start at 25. We need to help them understand that it's a great thing to do, to reinvent themselves, and give them the skills to reinvent themselves over that time. Why do we think this will happen where other types of technologies haven't changed teaching over the past 500 years? Well, for a start, the world is changing. Our students will in 10 years' time, will have a different expectation than we do today. I'm about to be a grandfather. 2 months' time, I'm going to be a grandfather for the first time. I find it hard to believe that my grandson will go into higher education in 18 years' time and be happy being in an environment like this. They are going to live their life with technology. They will experience things that we have no concept of because it's just not where we come from. We're all too old to understand the world that children of today will be living in. They are going to demand a different type of education, and we think that this will drive the changes that we're talking about. We also think society will demand it. There's such a force of popularism, particularly across Europe today, a need to bring down our elites, which we've seen in some nations. Well, we believe this technology, rather than bringing the elites down to the average, can raise the average up to the capability of the elites. A real force for democratisation. The example I use is Oxford and Cambridge in the UK have a very different system of teaching than most universities, and it's a very, very expensive system. This capability gives every university the opportunity to be as good as the Oxford system. My clicker's stopped. We also think that actually things will become so complex that it's going to become beyond the ability of an individual to try and teach their subject. And so actually, we will need to provide as much aid to our lecturers in future as we do to architects to design building. An architect wouldn't imagine designing a building without intensive technology support. The world of the future, lecturers are going to need the same type of support, as it were, computer-aided teaching. So what should you do now? It's great to talk about this. It is a vision for 10 to 15 years' time. But actually, if you don't start now, you'll miss it. And the key thing is, start experimenting. And many of you are doing this. So there's lots of great examples around the world of institutions starting to play with these types of technologies, whether it's learning analytics, mixed reality, or whatever it happens to be. Things are moving. But the technology, as I say, the technology is not quite there. So start playing with it. Start understanding what the capability is. Another key thing we need to do is to understand how we're going to build these capabilities, particularly the mixed reality content. One of the examples I use is virtual Rome. I don't know how many of you know that. You can Google it. This was a result of archaeologists from around the world, some of our best archaeologists in the world collaborating to do the best virtual simulation of Rome that they can do. It has to be the most definitive version of what we think Rome looked like. And so students can wander through virtual Rome with their headsets. And that is something that no single institution could probably have done in a way that has credibility. And there are so many of these things that we as academics will need. Why should every institution build a virtual reality simulation of falling into a black hole, or the theory of relativity, or understanding the particles in an atom, or even just of going back to the Renaissance painters and sort of being able to see what it was like in their studios or whatever. These are going to be developed time and time again if we don't actually collaborate globally and do it once and get our best academics, our researchers, to tell us what this should actually be rather than doing it ourselves time and time again. Another key thing you need to think about is, are you teaching the right things? As I said earlier, that's something you need to do now to start thinking about how you train your students for the future rather than today. And probably the most important thing, and we see this happening across the UK already, is to actually engage your senior leaders. This change has got to be driven from the top. There's lots of things that we can do as IT folk, but if the senior leaders don't buy into it and don't drive the change in their institutions, things won't change. But not only do they need to start envisioning what that future should be, we need to free them from the constraints of today and the constraints of us old people and the way that we want to teach, as opposed to the way our students want to learn. So you absolutely must involve students, but you need to start with a blank sheet of paper. Re-envision your university to what it could be if actually you weren't constrained by a lot of the constraints that we see today. There's my clicker. Is this going to work? No. And lastly, because I've talked a lot about teaching, research. Research is much, much harder for us to do. We formed our education vision. We got senior teaching leaders together from across the UK to be able to give us some ideas of how they thought things could go, and then we've extrapolated from there. It's so much harder to talk about research in the same way. Teaching is pretty much teaching. Yes, it varies in all sorts of ways, but it is pretty much the same type of thing. Research, unfortunately, isn't. Astronomers do not research in the same way as particle physicists, or nor do dance researchers or art researchers or whatever it happens to be. There is not a single research method that you can talk about. So talking about how these technologies will change research is a much harder thing. We're starting to convene researchers from across the UK to start the conversations about what it could look like. What are the themes we can draw out? Where will these technologies fundamentally shift research? Research is already doing some of this. Lots of researchers in certain fields are using robots already to do things, run experiments time and time again in a repeatable way without the fallibility of us humans making the experiments hard. And actually, it's a lot more fun for a lab technician to set a robot going than to have to set the same thing up thousands of times, whatever it can do. The technology can analyze data and is analyzing data in ways that we would not dream of. My best example here is the robotic capability that analysed the ingredients of toothpaste and worked out a potential cure for malaria. I don't think a person would ever have thought of doing that. But it's not going to be simple. We're talking about the technology, actually doing the research, and coming back to my headline, that's a true headline. Again, you can Google it. Sony actually have a paper on trying to create a robotic Nobel Prize winner. It's their ultimate goal of the Sony chief technologists is to be able to build a Nobel Prize winner. They're not expecting it tomorrow, fortunately. But if we get there, what are the ethical questions behind it? Can we really, as people, trust the outputs of machines? Can we understand the outputs of machines? And a more prosaic one, but in our one of the key things we're doing in terms of open science, how on earth do we preserve the artificial intelligence that has come up with that Nobel Prize-winning idea for the future? Because if we're truly in repeatable open science, we need to do it with artificial intelligence as much as the data and the papers that we preserve in open science. So that's a very quick presentation of our vision. There's way more behind that, but hopefully we've whetted your appetite for what the future could be like. And the key thing is, it is actually in your hands to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you for your informative and very inspiring talk. Do you have one or two questions to Dr. Feldman now? Please raise, yes. Yes? Oh, you need the mic.
I'd certainly like to thank you for the inspiration. I also wonder what will happen to one of the less appreciated roles of universities as havens for curmudgeonly contrary points of view. When I hear you say force for democratization, are you following current news? I mean, that's been said about every communication technology in the last, I don't know how long. Obviously, there will be some benefits, but if we're not aware or attempting to be aware of the risks, where does that leave us?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, every technological change has a dark side to it. I mean, our view is if we have to understand the dark side and do our best to avoid it, but not allow it to stop us moving in the right directions. I actually think curmudgeonly old, and I am old, so I'm happy to say that, curmudgeonly old lecturers giving contrary views to the stuff that the students are getting, being force-fed by machines, is exactly the position that we want. Because I think that's where people will add the difference. They will challenge students to think outside of the norm. They will challenge what they're being taught. So I actually think that is exactly the role for our lecturers, to stimulate students to go beyond what every student learns. The democratization piece, well, it's the... you've got your president, let's say it's an American accent, I think. Is it not an American accent? I apologise.
Yes, that was Canadian.
Ah, sorry. Well, you're both...
We have young Justin Trudeau.
Yeah, and he's as bad on Twitter as Trump at times. We have the two North American presidents connecting with people in a way that could never have been done in the past. That has democratized communication, not necessarily for the better, but it does it.
I would say that's true for both of us.
Thank you. One last question.
Thank you. I must say I'm all in favour of the technology reducing the drudgery. But if there are no exams, if the technology is watching the student all the time, isn't this the 21st century panopticon? Is this going to create a risk-averse group of people who do not want to put themselves out there in the front in case they're wrong? Is it going to create more mental stress because of the constant viewing of what they're doing?
Again, it's a great question, and again, it's the dark side of the potential greatness that could come out of this. But again, I think part of this is we're putting our values and our risks on the students of tomorrow. Coming back to my grandson, I can't imagine my grandson being in any world where he is not used to being watched 100% of the time, and it's just they've learned how to manage that and live with that. It is a real issue. We made a mistake yesterday of using some wrong words about a project that is kicking off in the UK with trying to identify students at risk of mental health. One part of which is, can we look at their social media to do that? And we got a lot of pushback, quite right in some senses, around, do you understand the dangers of looking at student social media? You could actually stop, exactly at that point, you could stop them actually putting their fears on social media, so we might not be able to spot them. And it is a real risk. It's one we need to take very seriously and manage. But my guess is it's a passing risk over the future, because I can't imagine our concept of privacy is not going to be our children's concept of privacy.
Thank you. Please join us to meet the speaker lounge to continue the conversation about digital transformation. And for you, small token of our
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.